began thinking seriously about returning to the classroom when I was working on Avatar. And the reason, it was twofold. It was for twofold. One was that ever since I had done Jurassic Park and been a part of that project and worked on that, I'd been doing talks publicly about, movie design and movie visual effects. I mean, at first it was effects because I think Jurassic caught everyone off guard, and you could literally, everyone was like, they scratching their head, they didn't know what they had seen. So just to talk about how digital effects were made was extremely exciting for people. And they found it very informative too, because it was so new. Then it became about the process of design and how one gets into cinema and gets into movie design and concept design, and those questions came along. And then those grew into questions about what software do you use and what's your workflow like, and that all went on. And then I arrived on Avatar, which was a year and a half, almost 2 years of work in a very in a crucible, in a very high intensity environment. And I would occupy my days in the morning having coffee and looking over the work by thinking, how did I get this gig? Like, how did I get to be that guy who really was working at a level to be designing for a director who I admired so much and who'd done these iconic films, and who had worked with designers who I so totally admire, Sid Mead and Ron Cobb, and these people that really set the standard for the industry. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm kind of one of these guys now, and how did that happen? So I began to try to tease it apart and look at it. And I kind of came up with, there was something about what I had learned as a young person and then as a young designer that was transcending the opportunities. I was carrying something of value from project to project. I've subsequently named it the buoyant tool set. That's what I have, is I have a buoyant tool set that kind of moves with me through time and space. So one of the things I became aware of when I was kind of doing this introspection on Avatar and then thinking about my career and how I'd kind of moved from one of the, these kind of sort of signature picture to another signature picture. I started to think about, well, maybe this unique position I find myself in, maybe that's a point in time where I should take stock in that career and take stock in the shape of my personal journey, my personal career path through Hollywood, and see about how to distill it and break it down in such a way as I could give back to the students and maybe provide them some understandings or some resources or some tools to have their own successes. And I think because I had started out with the idea of teaching as a goal as a young person, and then having a father who was a great professor, and then having these successes, it sort of all stacked up to me to be a good time to take a step in that direction and find my way back into the classroom. My love of drawing and my use of drawing as a primary design tool is something that was very important when I first was learned about the opening in the Comm Arts department at VCU. Communication arts is really based on a foundation of drawing, and the students are all asked to draw and to keep visual diaries. And then on top of that, whether they're going to explore fashion design or whether they're going to explore photography or they're going to explore, painting, graphic designs, those things are kind of built upon this foundation of studio practice and drawing. And I think for me, looking back in the long distance that I've traveled, that you asked earlier about my father, that's kind of where I started, in the basement with a spiral-bound notebook and a pencil. And so I have a lot of confidence in that as a primary tool and a good foundation for the creative evolution of a person. Where I run a little afoul of my own background, as it were, with the fine arts, is I've become, over the years, a technologist. I mean, I still consider myself a studio artist. I still love to draw. I still see my primary tool of communication as drawing. And I still start my design process by by using pencils and pens on the back of the script pages. I do usually break out some of my early designs in the read-throughs or when I'm first looking at the script or talking to the director. So I have that tradition, and I embrace that. That's foundational to who I am. But I'm also very cognizant of how technology, digital technology, is not only changing the tool sets that are available to artists, to creatives, to designers, but it's also changing the theater. It's changing the delivery pipeline. It's changing the kinds of outcomes that creatives can participate in. 3D printing is a perfect example. I mean, you can take something that exists only in the digital realm and make it an analog object. That's a whole new way for a creative to have a voice. And I think that the way that I want students to look at technology is to not be overly seduced by it, but at the same time never be ignorant of it, never be dismissive of it, because we need to find that new balance so that our potencies as creatives can have the most expansive and potent voice. My advice to students has evolved for the last 20 years. I mean, there was a time when I said, stay home an extra year and buy a computer. That was in the early 90s. And then it was learn X, Y, and Z software program. That was in the late 90s. And then it was really learn to understand where your personal voice comes from, like where your vision of yourself, where your strengths lie, those kinds of analysis. And then really try to amplify those. And now, at this particular juncture, I think it's really about 4 critical things that I tell students, and they have to do with this buoyant tool set concept that I mentioned. One is the acquisition of skills. So you want to have skills, and that just takes time and practice. There's no way around it. So if you want to be a photographer, if you want to be a designer, if you want to do 3D modeling, you want to do game design, you're going to be able to identify the skills required to do it, and then you just have to do the practice. You have to discipline yourself to create those skills. And you can do that alone now because the internet has tutorials. There's tons of ways to network electronically through user groups or through blogs. The amount of creative information that's available today it's unprecedented. And people, by and large, that dwell in those spheres, those communities of creatives out there, they're very giving people. They're very quick to answer questions. So the acquisition of skills is number one. The illumination and the fortification of the interior is look inside yourself, find out what it is that you have that makes you click, makes you tick. If you work very well under certain conditions, try to understand those conditions so you can use them to your advantage. If there's certain kinds of lines of investigation, if it's science fiction art or fantasy art, or if maybe it's just the human form, or maybe it's a certain kind of understanding of composition. Learn what really gets you going and try to use that as a foundation to evolve from. The third would be confidence. Building confidence on every turn. The one thing I tell students, one thing I believe beyond all things, is you can never have too much confidence. And you can never stop trying to acquire new forms of confidence, because as you move through your professional career, you're going to be asked to be doing different tasks. So as you move from, for example, designing to art directing, you want to build confidences right away so that you understand what you're being asked to do and you do it really well. And lastly is the incubation of opportunity. And that is to be constantly on the lookout for both new opportunities in the form of new technologies, or in opportunities that you may have yet not discovered. Who you know, who they know, how do you find out about the filmmakers in the local area? How do you find out about entering film festivals? How do you make your own iMovies? How do you access all those resources that are already in your toolbox, already available to you, but you just maybe haven't spent the time to investigate them thoroughly and see what kind of value they have. So it's really the buoyant tool set that contains at present those 4 key pieces of ingredient, those 4 key lines of development. And that's kind of how I see us all moving into the future.